legend, the manatee. In northeastern Brazil, on the island of Itamaraca, a center has been created for the preservation and study of the manatee, a sea mammal seriously threatened with extinction. There are only 2,500 in the world, 500 in Brazil. The species has been protected by international conventions since 1967. The manatee, peixe-boi in Portuguese, is also the name of the refuge. Daniel is 24. He's responsible for the diet of the animals at the center, and he bottle feeds the babies until the age of 2. I've been working with manatees for 10 years. I'm on duty every day. I have no days off at all. I've learned to love this animal that I'd never known existed. One day, I want to pass this work down to my son. The center's program began 20 years ago when the country became aware that the manatee's survival was being threatened. The silting up of part of Brazil's coastline as a result of deforestation has been indirectly instrumental in the animal's disappearance. During colonization, the virgin forest was razed for the exploitation of sugarcane. In heavy tropical rains, the land, with nothing to hold it, ran down to the rivers and caused the silting up of the estuaries. Sheltered by the currents, these estuaries had traditionally been the area where manatees would reproduce. Females, therefore, have to give birth at sea and lose their young because of the waves and violent currents. For decades, dozens of newborn infants have regularly run aground and died on the beach. Every year, 2 or 3 manatees are rescued by a team from peixe-boi. The Itamaraca Center was created to receive these orphans of the sea. They are all placed in Daniel's care. His job is a difficult one since very few of the babies survive. Nevertheless, he struggles and suffers with the animals when pneumonia strikes them. The survivors become his little protégés. After 4 years at the refuge, the manatees are released into their natural environment. The center presently has 12 manatees, of which there are 2 babies and 2 4-year-old youngsters, which are going to be set free in a week. The manatees receive close medical surveillance. Today, a team of specialists is going to measure a young female.
The length of the tail, how large it is, all these measures are important to know.
Milton is the center's veterinarian. Oceanographer Regis Lima is responsible for the project. He is also one of its founders. In the past, to measure a manatee, the team would isolate it in an empty basin. Young females would lose their young because of the stress. Now, however, although it's more difficult, manatees are measured with more respect. An adult manatee is between 2.5 and 4.5 meters long and weighs between 200 and 700 kilograms. In spite of their imposing silhouette, they are the most inoffensive animals in the world. The manatee is a playful animal and likes human company, which has contributed to its disappearance.
That's another way of doing total. We've come up with ways of doing half girths to then calculate total girth.
Every day during low tide, Daniel gathers seaweed to feed the center's manatees. The manatee is an herbivorous sea mammal and consumes 10% of its weight in seaweed every day. It's hard work since the men have to stand in cold water for hours in order to pull out hundreds of kilograms. In nature, the manatee eats for 6 to 8 hours a day, which is why it's also called sea cow. Decimated during colonization, the coasts of Brazil were once heavily populated with manatees. The Indians worshipped them and called them Yara, the mother of the ocean. This youngster will be released in a few days. In order to simulate pulling the weeds out, Daniel puts some in a tube, since the animal will have to face this difficult task once in its natural environment. Alagoas is a small state in this huge country. We're 400 kilometers south of the Itamaraca center. Another team from Pesheboy is trying to capture Aldo, a manatee released a few years ago and which has adapted perfectly to life in the wild. The team is hoping that the animal will act as a guide for the 2 young manatees, which will be set free in a few days.
Tá sentindo? Se ele tá aqui, vocês estão firmando ele. Tá entendendo?
Carolina is a biologist and responsible for the reinsertion program at Alagoas.
Desse lado, puxem um.
From the river where they found him, the team is going to take Aldo to an enclosure built at sea to help manatees adapt to nature.
Você, por favor, você pode ir no outro lá?
Isso aqui já depois vai despejar aí.
É bom ele ficar aqui só, mas... Ali, você vem aqui.
Pegou logo o coqueiro?
Maurício, depois você fecha no rádio, fala quando você fala de monitoramento, quer dizer que tem rádio, boia.
Aldo will wait in this enclosure for the center's 2 youngsters. Then they'll stay together and get acquainted for 10 days. They have to work quickly since the tide is rising and the waves will become violent, thus complicating the maneuver. Meanwhile, at the Itamaraca Center, the men are getting ready to transfer the 2 youngsters to be released, Araqueto and Boivoador, in the tank. We've emptied this basin to capture them more easily and then put them in the pool for transport. It's normal for them to resist a little. Milton, the veterinarian, has just taken DNA samples from each of the animals. They will thus be identifiable and benefit from a more precise medical follow-up after they're set free. Regis Lima weighs them one last time, 300 kilograms each. He notes that the 2 youngsters are in good health. The team is truly dedicated to the manatees and proves it during a series of delicate maneuvers. Paradoxically, and in spite of its imposing size, the species is very fragile.
Toda a pele deles.
We use mineral oil to protect the skin during the trip. The wind dries it out.
Mas tem a questão do vento. Então o óleo vai ajudar a proteger a pele.
Milton and Daniel will continue this operation throughout the 10-hour journey to Alagoas to avoid dehydration. In order to avoid fractures and bruises, the truck speed will be 30 kilometers an hour all the way to Alagoas. Manatees are very sensitive to cold, and the men's prime concern is that the animals will catch pneumonia. In the morning, the truck nears its destination, an area which is still wild, with only rudimentary means of transportation.